Help me welcome Representative Tulsi Gabbard.
Aloha. It's a beautiful Sunday night. Thank you so much, Andrea, for being here, for your leadership here in our Democratic Party, and for your kind introduction today. Thank you very much. I want to say a big thanks also to Heath, who has provided, there you are. I'm going to give you a hug when we're done here. You're amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your music with us. And thanks to our sound guy, Steve, for making the connection and hooking this up. Our days are always better with a little bit of music, right? Thank you so much. I want to say a couple other quick thank yous. Mary McAdams and Rory Kilcoyne, can you raise your hands? Or Rory? And is Mary here? She's not here. Okay. Thank you for taking time to be here. Thank you for your leadership on the Ankeny area Democrats. And last but not least, I want to say thanks to Madison and Haley, who are the managers of this fine establishment. Can you wave at us there? Thank you. Thank you. And I don't know if they're here, but Sean and Jeff are the owners. No, they're not here. Okay. Well, thanks to them. You can extend our thanks to them. For some reason, given this is the Mistress Brewing Company, I assume that there would be someone other than Sean and Jeff who are the owners. Thank you for your kind and warm welcome. Andrea mentioned a couple of things that I usually start this conversation with that are really important about how essential it is that we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to share with you a headline that popped up on my phone just as we were pulling up here that I'm very concerned about. And it speaks to what happens when we don't have a government of, by, and for the people. Here's the headline, CNN popped up. Trump says U.S., quote, locked and loaded, depending on verification of attack on a Saudi oil field. Locked and loaded. I'm going to read the full quote to you because I think you'll find it as deeply disturbing as I do. Trump said, quote, Saudi Arabia's oil supply was attacked. There is reason to believe that we know the culprit. We're locked and loaded depending on verification, but are waiting to hear from the kingdom as to who they believe was the cause of this attack and under what terms we should proceed. There are so many things wrong with what he said. We, the United States, with the strongest military in the world, are locked and loaded, he says. We are waiting to hear from the kingdom of Saudi Arabia, as to who they believe was the cause of the attack, and under what terms we, the United States of America, should proceed. As a soldier, I can tell you this pisses me off. But Trump has been very transparent and laid very clear what we have known for a long time now. Trump is bending the knee to the interests and the wishes of Saudi Arabia and their kingdom, and using my brothers and sisters in uniform to carry out their wishes. To carry out their wishes. When I took my oath of enlistment, I took an oath to protect and defend our country, to protect and defend our Constitution, to protect and defend the American people, to serve the interests of our country and our national security. And to hear this kind of statement coming from our commander-in-chief dishonors that promise and that great sacrifice that our men in uniform, men and women in uniform, and their families make every single day. How many of you saw a highly controversial tweet that I put out, gosh, was it last year? about Saudi Arabia and Donald Trump, telling him directly, being Saudi Arabia's bitch is not putting America first. And I don't use those words lightly. I don't use those words lightly. And when I put out that tweet, I couldn't find any other word to describe what he is doing to our service members and to our country. We need a commander-in-chief who will put the interests of the American people and our country first. Not the interests of Saudi Arabia, not the interests of any other country. Now, he's saying we're going to look to the kingdom for verification and for instructions on how to proceed. Secretary Pompeo was on TV, I think yesterday or today, saying immediately, Iran is behind this attack, without providing any evidence to do so. And since this attack happened, you've had specialists and experts going through and analyzing the very. Our Secretary of State said on national television definitively that Iran was behind this attack. They're not even pretending to show their hand about what this really is all about. That people like Mike Pompeo and others in the Trump administration, they've been trying to go to war with Iran for a really long time. And they have been taking action and laying down the groundwork to do so, pushing us to the point where we are literally right now on the brink of a war with Iran. Trump says we are locked and loaded, and I believe him. I believe him. Here's what is at stake. A war with Iran would be far more devastating than anything that we ever saw in the war in Iraq that I served in. Would be far more costly. It would take more American lives, the lives of our sons and daughters, our men and women in uniform, our brothers and sisters, moms and dads, people who are deployed right now at the instruction of this administration. This is a war that would not be contained within the boundaries of the country of Iran. It would be a regional war. And it would be a war that would create far more of a refugee crisis than anything that we've seen across the Middle East. It would cause more death and destruction and pain and suffering for the people, both in Iran and around the region. Trump is saying he's locked and loaded. Iran's response was, we didn't do this, but if you want to come to war with us, we are ready for war. This is where, as we're sitting here tonight, we are one spark away from a disastrous, costly war. Haven't we had enough? Haven't we had enough? This would be yet another in a long string of unnecessary wars of choice that unfortunately our country has waged, and this has crossed both Democrat and Republican administrations. Wars in other countries overseas to overthrow authoritarian dictators, wars that have taken so many of American lives, that have caused so much pain and suffering across the region, and that have cost us as taxpayers over $6 trillion. Just since 9/11 alone, over $6 trillion. Where does that money come from? Now, if you think about some of the needs and things that maybe you and your family are concerned about here in Ankeny, whether we're talking about healthcare, the healthcare needs that we have within our education system, whether it's textbooks or computers or good pay for our teachers. You talk about infrastructure needs, basic infrastructure needs, clean water, clean air. Every single time we talk about things at the local level in our government, at the state level and the federal level, there's just not enough money to take care of our people here at home. There's not enough to rebuild our communities and fill those needs here at home. But somehow there's always enough money to go and launch a new war. Nobody's asking, hey, President Trump, where are you going to find the trillions more dollars that you'll need to fight this war, to take care of the veterans who will come home with both visible and invisible wounds, bearing these scars for the rest of their lives? Where will you find the money to put into the nation building in these other countries that are destroyed as a result of this war? Where does this money come from? Somehow that money's always there, but there's never enough to take care of what we need here at home. And worse yet, these wars have made our country less safe. So it's one thing if you're fighting a war that's necessary to defeat an enemy that's threatening the safety and security of the American people. That's what our military is for. But these wars that we're talking about, Iraq, Libya, the ongoing regime change war in Syria, this war that we are on the brink of with Iran, these are unnecessary wars that take such an incredible toll, that bear such an incredible cost. The most important responsibility that the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. Now, we've seen what happens when you have a president who is not qualified to serve in that position, does not have the experience or depth of understanding about these issues and how we deal with challenges that we have with other countries, who doesn't understand diplomacy, and that if we are unwilling to have these talks, if we're unwilling to negotiate, to work out our differences, the only alternative is war. This is at the heart of why I'm running for president, to bring the experience that I have, serving as a soldier for over 16 years, the experience that I've gotten from those 2 deployments to the Middle East, the experience that I've had in Congress now for nearly 7 years, focused on our national security and foreign policy, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, bringing the combination of these experiences and the depth of understanding that goes with that to fulfill this most important responsibility of Commander-in-Chief, prepared to do that job on day one, to end these wasteful wars and stop us from waging new ones, to work to end this new Cold War that we are in with escalating tensions between the United States and nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China, and the arms race that's going with that, costing us more money, dollars that are coming out of our schools, out of our communities, and instead redirect those resources towards serving the needs of our people right here at home. Nation building right here at home. Getting our priorities straight as a country, leading with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict. Being that force for good that we can and we should be in the world. Engaging with other countries, work out difficult issues that need to be worked out, but also explore our potential in areas where we have shared interest. Now, some of you may wonder, and sometimes I'm asked, well, you know, look, foreign policy is an important issue, but it's just one of many, many, many important issues. At night, thinking about our nation's foreign policy. A few of you. Wow, more of you than I expected. I'm glad to see that. Most people, that wouldn't be the case. You know, they're thinking about, you know, a woman I earlier today, her husband has early onset Alzheimer's, 62 years old, and she has now set aside her life to be his primary caregiver. She's trying to figure out how they're going to make ends meet. That's what's keeping her up at night. For other folks, they're thinking about how to make sure that their child who has some special needs is getting the kind of education that they need at school. These are things that are keeping people up at night. The reality is that our foreign policy and dealing with the cost of war is central to every single domestic challenge and need that we face. Which is why I focus on this, which is why this change is so necessary, because otherwise you'll hear a lot of promises from a lot of politicians, but if they fail to address this most important central point, then what you're getting is a lot of empty promises to accept. I look forward to being able to earn your support, to be able to lead our country forward away from the brink of nuclear catastrophe, ending these wasteful wars, and actually seeing our taxpayer dollars to be used for what they were meant for, to rebuild a broken immigration system. We're getting the resources where they are needed at every single level of our government, where people continue to be arrested and imprisoned for basic drug possession violations. From where we are today, where we really do have a government that is of, by, and for the rich and powerful and the very few, and get us to where we need to be. A government that is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. This is what is at the heart of how we make this change. And we make this change by making sure that we, the people, have our voices heard through this democratic process. It is an imperfect process, no doubt. There's a lot that we need to do to be able to strengthen our democracy so that our voices outweigh the influence of those who have a lot of money and a lot of law. We are the change that we need to see. Thank you so much.
Hopefully not going to be really emotional, but I want to introduce you to some of my friends, because I think it gets lost in this. About 7 months ago, I started tutoring English through Skype, Iranians. They are some of the most intelligent people who was sharing. He had tears in his eyes when he thought about all the deaths in the Iraqi-Iran war. And I have them share with me how the sanctions are, she has two grandmothers. One of them is refusing cancer surgery. Okay, thank you. One of them is refusing cancer surgery because the cost has gone up since the sanctions. Education. I have two friends, I want to tell you this, I have two friends, and I'm not going to take long. One is in Israel. One is going to school in Canada, and I know that we're not Canada, but I'll tell you part of the obstacle here for Iranians getting education in the United States. This lady from Israel, she has no problem getting a student visa to come to Canada. My other friend would turn down the first time. She doesn't want to go to school here because she wanted to study medicine, and that's 8 years that she couldn't go home, because if she goes home, the process starts all over again and she could be denied a visa. Yep. And I want to know from you, I want to know, take a step back from where we're at right now, how we can engage this younger generation. The people I talk to, I mean, obviously they can't say that publicly, don't support the government. And they wonder what we want because the sanctions are on them. The government has everything they need. And Representative, I have testimony too, if you or one of your staff wants to look at them all. The ones I work with, about 5 of them, to write letters about how the sanctions are affecting them. So if you want those, I'd be glad to share them with you. But I'd like you to share with me how we can engage this generation that is not supportive, but obviously has nothing they can do right now because the power is in the government, to engage them and hopefully prepare in the future a more free Iran and maybe even a more Western-leaning Iran. And the other thing I want to share is this. Iranians are extremely patriotic. So the one thing you were doing by this war talk is we're driving people towards the government and supporting the government. Yeah. So thank you.
What was your name? War waged with sanctions. And you're exactly right. These sanctions that some were in place previously, but that was a big deal when the Iran nuclear deal was negotiated, because it removed so many of the sanctions that were in place previously with Iran. And it is the people of Iran who suffer the most because of those sanctions. And that was one of the first things that the Trump administration did after they tore up the Iran nuclear deal, was they reinstated those crippling economic sanctions and added more to that. And even still now, we're talking about how can we sanction Iran more and more. And it is the Iranian people who suffer as a result. And you're right, if the government has their ways and their channels and they're able to take care of themselves, it is the people who are working every day, who are going to school every day, who are suffering the most. We're seeing the very same impacts in places like Syria, where people are trying to return back to their homes, they're trying to begin to rebuild their country. They can't even open a bank account. Small business owner can't start a small business. There is a black cash market that ends up benefiting and fueling, gangs, criminals, and yes, terrorist organizations. You see the very same thing happening in countries like Venezuela and Cuba. Trump just increased sanctions in Venezuela, increased sanctions in Cuba. It's not the governments of these countries that are being hurt, it is the people. It is the people. So I think before getting to your question, I think it's important that we talk about ending these sanctions, recognizing that they are a weapon of war. Doing so frees people to be able to get back to some sense of normalcy in their lives. Now, when I talk about the United States shouldn't be involved in regime change, it's because of our country's long history of doing so, in overthrowing authority. Even for those who have good, saying, there are people who are suffering in these other countries. Can't we go in and do something? They claimed it was for the people.